Maria Santos stood outside the glass doors of the Whitmore Tower penthouse, her hand shaking slightly as she smoothed down her simple black dress. She had bought this dress 4 years ago for her cousin's wedding, and it was still the nicest thing she owned. Tonight, it would have to do. For 3 years, Maria had worked as a janitor at Whitmore Industries. She knew every corner of this building. She had mopped these marble floors hundreds of times. She had cleaned the windows of the executive suites until they sparkled like diamonds. She had emptied trash cans filled with documents that discussed millions of dollars like it was pocket change. But never, not once, had she been inside the penthouse during an actual event. Tonight was different. And she wished it wasn't. Her supervisor, Mrs. Chun, had called her just 4 hours ago, her voice weak and apologetic. A stomach bug had knocked her flat, and someone needed to oversee the cleaning staff at the CEO's annual charity gala. "Please, Maria," Mrs. Chun had begged. "You're the only one I trust. Just stay in the background. Direct the team. Make sure everything runs smoothly. No one will even notice you there." Maria had wanted to say no. Every part of her had screamed to say no. But Mrs. Chun had always been kind to her, had always treated her like a human being when others looked right through her. So Maria had said yes. Now, standing at the entrance, she was regretting that decision with every fiber of her being. The security guard looked at her badge, then looked at her dress, then looked at her face. His eyes carried that familiar expression she had seen 1,000 times before. It was the look people gave when they were trying to figure out if she belonged somewhere. She never did. At least, not in places like this. "Service entrance is around the back," he said flatly. "I know," Maria replied, keeping her voice steady. "But Mrs. Chun told me to check in through the main entrance tonight. I'm supervising the cleaning team." He studied her badge again, made a phone call, and finally stepped aside with a small nod. No apology. No smile. Just a slight movement that told her she was allowed to exist in this space for the next few hours. Maria walked through the doors, and immediately she felt like she had stepped into another world. The penthouse was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over everything they touched. The floors were polished so perfectly that Maria could see her own reflection in them. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne and tiny appetizers that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. And the people. Oh, the people. Women floated by in gowns that shimmered like liquid silk, their necks and wrists dripping with jewels. Men stood in small clusters, laughing confidently, their suits perfectly tailored, their watches catching the light. Everyone looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. Everyone looked like they belonged. Maria clutched her service badge a little tighter and made her way toward the back, where she knew the service hallway would be. She kept her head down, trying to make herself as small as possible. Invisible. That was the goal. Get through the night without being noticed, and everything would be fine. She almost made it. "Excuse me." The voice came from her right, sharp and dripping with something that wasn't quite curiosity. Maria turned to find a woman standing there, champagne glass in hand, looking at her like she was examining something unpleasant on the bottom of her shoe. The woman was beautiful in that polished, expensive way that rich people often were. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elegant twist. Her red dress probably cost more than Maria's rent for 6 months. Her smile was the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" Maria asked quietly. The woman tilted her head, that cold smile widening. "I was about to ask you the same thing, sweetheart. Are you lost? The coat check is that way." She pointed with one perfectly manicured finger toward the entrance. "Unless you're looking for the bathroom? I know these big buildings can be confusing for some people." Maria felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her expression calm. She had learned long ago that showing emotion only made things worse. People like this woman fed on reactions. They wanted to see her embarrassed, wanted to see her stumble over her words, wanted confirmation that she didn't belong. "I'm with the service staff," Maria said simply. "I'm just heading to the back." "Oh, I see." The woman's eyes traveled slowly down Maria's dress, then back up again. The judgment was obvious. "Well, I suppose someone has to clean up after us, don't they?" A small group of women nearby giggled, and Maria realized they had been watching the whole exchange. One of them whispered something behind her hand, and another burst into louder laughter. Maria said nothing. She simply nodded once, turned, and continued walking toward the service hallway. Behind her, she could hear the woman's voice carrying through the crowd. "Can you believe they let her walk through the main entrance? Standards are really slipping around here." More laughter followed, but Maria didn't look back. She pushed through the service door and finally allowed herself to breathe. The hallway was narrow and plain, a stark contrast to the glittering ballroom she had just left. Here, the walls were painted simple white, and the floor was plain concrete. Here, she was supposed to be. This was her world. Maria found her team already working, moving efficiently between the kitchen and the storage areas. They greeted her with tired smiles and quick nods. These were her people. Hardworking, invisible, essential, but never acknowledged. Together, they would make sure that every glass was polished, every spill was cleaned, every piece of trash disappeared before anyone important could see it. She should have felt comfortable here. She should have felt at home. But something was different tonight. That woman's words kept echoing in her head. The laughter. The way those eyes had looked at her, like she was nothing. Maria had faced this kind of treatment before. Many times. When she first came to America, she had worked 3 jobs just to survive. She had been talked down to, ignored, dismissed. She had learned to let it roll off her back, to remind herself that her worth wasn't determined by people who didn't know her. But tonight, for some reason, it hurt more than usual. Maybe it was the champagne dress and the crystal chandeliers. Maybe it was the reminder of just how vast the gap was between her life and theirs. Maybe it was the fact that she was 42 years old now, and some part of her had hoped that by this point, things would be different. She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. There was work to do. That was what mattered. That was what had always mattered. Maria? One of the younger staff members, a boy barely out of high school, approached her with a worried expression. "There's a spill in the main ballroom." Someone knocked over a whole tray of appetizers near the stage. "Should I handle it?" Maria sighed. Going back out, there was the last thing she wanted to do. But this was her job. This was her responsibility. "No," she said quietly, straightening her shoulders. "I'll take care of it myself." She grabbed a cleaning kit and pushed back through the service door, stepping once again into the world where she didn't belong. If only she knew what the rest of the night had in store for her. If only she knew that before this evening was over. Every single person in that room would know her name. Maria made her way through the crowded ballroom, keeping her head down and her steps quick. The spill was near the stage, just as the young staff member had said. A tray of appetizers had been knocked over, leaving a mess of crushed pastries and scattered napkins on the polished floor. Nothing too difficult. She had cleaned up worse. She knelt down and began working quickly, gathering the broken pieces into a small bag, wiping the floor with practiced efficiency. A few guests glanced her way, but most didn't even notice she was there. That was fine. That was exactly how she wanted it. She was almost finished when she heard the laughter again. It was the same group of women from before, standing just a few feet away. The blonde woman in the red dress was at the center of them, holding court like a queen surrounded by her loyal subjects. Her voice was loud enough that Maria could hear every word. I'm just saying, if you're going to hire help, at least make sure they know how to dress properly. Did you see that sad little black dress she was wearing? I've seen better outfits at a funeral. The other women laughed, and Maria felt her jaw tighten. She kept her eyes on the floor, focusing on the task in front of her. Just a few more seconds, and she could disappear back into the service hallway. Just a few more seconds. "Victoria, you're terrible," one of the other women said, but her tone made it clear she didn't mean it as criticism. "The poor thing probably can't afford anything better." Victoria. So that was her name. Well, that's not my problem, is it? Victoria replied, taking a long sip of her champagne. Some people are meant to shine, and some people are meant to clean up after those who do. That's just how the world works. Maria stood up, her cleaning finished. She turned to leave, but the ballroom was crowded now, and the path back to the service door was blocked by a group of men in expensive suits, deep in conversation about something involving stock prices and quarterly earnings. She would have to go around them. She would have to walk right past Victoria and her friends. Maria took a deep breath and started walking. She kept her eyes forward, her pace steady. Just a few more steps. Just a few more seconds. That's when everything went wrong. A waiter appeared from her left, moving quickly with a full tray of champagne glasses. Maria didn't see him until it was too late. They collided hard, and the tray went flying. Time seemed to slow down as the glasses tumbled through the air. Maria watched in horror as they arced gracefully, golden champagne catching the light from the chandeliers like liquid sunshine. And then they landed, right on Victoria Ashford. The champagne soaked through her red designer gown, running down the expensive fabric in dark, spreading stains. Ice cubes scattered across her shoes. Glass shattered on the floor around her feet. For one terrible moment, the entire ballroom went completely silent. Then Victoria screamed, "What have you done?" Her voice was so loud the people at the far end of the room turned to look. "What have you done to my dress?" Maria's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, her hands reaching out instinctively. "It was an accident. Please, let me help you clean. Don't touch me." Victoria jerked away like Maria was carrying some kind of disease. "Don't you dare touch me with those dirty hands." The room was watching now. Every single person in that ballroom had stopped what they were doing to stare at the scene unfolding before them. Maria could feel hundreds of eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. "I'm sorry," Maria said again, her voice smaller now. "I didn't see the waiter. It was an accident." "I'm so sorry. An accident?" Victoria's face was twisted with rage, her earlier beauty completely gone. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" "More than you'll make in 10 years. More than your entire pathetic life is worth." Maria felt the words hit her like physical blows. She wanted to defend herself, wanted to explain that it wasn't her fault, that the waiter had come out of nowhere. But the words wouldn't come. They were stuck somewhere in her chest, trapped beneath the weight of all those staring eyes. Instead, she did the only thing she could think of. She dropped to her knees and started picking up the broken glass, dabbing helplessly at the champagne puddles with napkins. Maybe if she cleaned fast enough, maybe if she fixed this somehow, it would all be okay. But Victoria wasn't finished. "Look at her," she said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "On her knees where she belongs." This is what happens when you let the help wander around where they don't belong. Laughter broke out from somewhere in the crowd. Not everyone was laughing, but enough people were. Enough to make Maria's eyes burn with tears she refused to let fall. "Security." Victoria snapped her fingers like she was calling a dog. "Get this woman out of here. She's clearly not capable of doing the simplest job without creating a disaster." 2 security guards started moving toward Maria, their faces expressionless. She could see them approaching from the corner of her eye, and her heart sank. This was it. She was going to be thrown out in front of everyone. She might even lose her job over this. 3 years of hard work, of showing up early and staying late, of doing everything right, and it was all going to end because of one terrible accident. That won't be necessary. The voice was quiet, but carried an authority that made everyone stop. The security guards froze. Victoria's mouth snapped shut. The whispers died away. An elderly man stepped forward from the crowd. He was tall and thin, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His suit was simple compared to some of the flashier outfits in the room, but there was something about the way he carried himself that commanded respect. Maria recognized him immediately. Everyone in the building knew his face. It was Richard Whitmore, the 78-year-old founder and CEO of Whitmore Industries, the man whose name was on the building, whose charity they were all here to support, whose fortune had built an empire. "Mr. Whitmore," Victoria started, her voice suddenly sweet as honey. "This woman ruined my dress. She was careless and clumsy, and I think, Mr. Whitmore interrupted gently, "that accidents happen. I also think that the measure of a person's character is not in the mistakes they make, but in how they treat others when those mistakes occur." Victoria's face went pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly unsure how to respond. Mr. Whitmore turned to Maria and offered her his hand. It took her a moment to realize what he was doing. He was helping her up. The CEO of one of the largest companies in the city was offering his hand to a janitor on her knees. She took it, and he pulled her gently to her feet. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear. Maria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Good." He gave her a small smile. "Why don't you take a few minutes to collect yourself? The service hallway is right through that door. Take whatever time you need." She nodded again, and somehow her feet carried her away from the crowd, away from Victoria's furious glare, away from all those watching eyes. She pushed through the service door and leaned against the wall, finally allowing herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was still racing. But she hadn't cried. Not a single tear had fallen in front of those people. She stayed there for a long moment, trying to calm herself down. The worst was over, she told herself. The night couldn't possibly get any worse than what had just happened. She would stay in the back for the rest of the evening, direct her team from the shadows, and never step foot in that ballroom again. But fate had other plans for Maria Santos, because in just a few short hours, she would walk back into that ballroom. And this time, no one would be laughing. This time, they would all be listening. Maria stayed in the service hallway for nearly 20 minutes, letting her heartbeat return to normal and her hands stop shaking. The other staff members gave her sympathetic looks, but didn't ask questions. They understood. They had all been in her shoes at one point or another. When you worked jobs like theirs, humiliation came with the territory. Eventually, she pulled herself together and got back to work. There were still hours left in the evening, and hiding in the hallway wouldn't pay her bills. She directed her team quietly, making sure the kitchen was running smoothly, checking that the bathrooms were stocked and spotless. She did everything she could to stay busy, to keep her mind off what had happened. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. Victoria's words kept playing in her head like a song stuck on repeat. On her knees where she belongs. More than your entire pathetic life is worth. The laughter. The staring eyes. The feeling of being so small, so invisible, so utterly worthless in a room full of people who had everything. Maria shook her head and forced herself to focus. She had survived worse than this. Much worse. A cruel woman at a fancy party was nothing compared to what she had been through in her life. She would get through tonight, go home to her small apartment, and tomorrow this would all just be a bad memory. Around 9 o'clock, the energy in the ballroom began to shift. Maria noticed it from her spot near the service door, where she was supervising the dessert setup. The guests were moving toward the stage, finding seats at the elegant round tables that had been arranged throughout the room. Something was about to happen. She caught bits of conversation as people passed by. The pianist is supposed to be incredible. He's flown in from Vienna just for tonight. I heard Mr. Whitmore specifically requested him. Apparently, he's been trying to book this man for years. This is going to be the highlight of the evening. I can't wait. Maria felt a strange flutter in her chest. A pianist from Vienna. She remembered reading about this in the event program that Mrs. Chun had shown her. The performance was supposed to be the centerpiece of the entire gala, a special concert to inspire the guests before the big charity auction. Classical music. Beautiful, soaring classical music. Without meaning to, she found herself drifting closer to the ballroom entrance. She told herself she just needed to check on the dessert table near the stage. That was all. Just doing her job. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted to hear the music. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to think about music. So long since she had let herself remember. There was a time many years ago when music had been her entire world. When she had dreamed of stages and concert halls and audiences holding their breath as her fingers danced across the keys. But that was another life. A life that belonged to a different woman in a different time. She pushed those memories away, just like she always did, and focused on the present. The stage was beautiful. A grand piano sat in the center, gleaming black and magnificent under the soft spotlight. It was a Steinway, Maria noticed immediately. One of the finest pianos in the world. Just looking at it made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. She found a spot near the back wall, half hidden behind a tall potted plant, and waited with everyone else. But the minutes passed, and nothing happened. The guests began to murmur. People checked their watches. The event coordinator, a thin woman with a clipboard and a headset, kept rushing back and forth between the stage and the backstage area. Her face was getting more worried with each trip. Then, suddenly, there was commotion. The backstage door burst open, and two paramedics rushed through, pushing a stretcher between them. On the stretcher lay an elderly man in a formal black suit, his face pale and covered in sweat. His eyes were closed, and an oxygen mask covered his nose and mouth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. What's happening? Someone whispered. Is that the pianist? Oh my God, is he going to be okay? The paramedics moved quickly, wheeling the stretcher through a side exit and out of sight. The event coordinator followed them, her face white with panic. For a long moment, the ballroom was frozen in shocked silence. Then the whispers began. What are they going to do now? The whole evening was built around this performance. Poor Mr. Whitmore. He was so excited about this. Maria looked toward the front of the room and saw the old CEO standing near the stage. His shoulders had slumped, and the light in his eyes had dimmed. He looked like a man who had just watched something precious slip through his fingers. The event coordinator returned, looking like she was barely holding herself together. She huddled with a group of staff members near the stage, their voices hushed but urgent. The performance was supposed to inspire the donors before the auction. Without it, we're going to lose momentum. Can we find someone else? Anyone who can play? In the next 10 minutes? Where are we supposed to find a concert pianist in 10 minutes? That's when Victoria Ashford stepped forward. She had changed her dress at some point during the evening, replacing the ruined red gown with a sleek silver one that probably cost just as much. Her smile was bright and confident as she approached the stage. "Excuse me," she said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I couldn't help but overhear your little problem. I took piano lessons as a child, and I'd be happy to save the evening." The event coordinator looked uncertain. Mrs. Ashford, that's very generous, but this is supposed to be a professional performance. The donors are expecting. The donors are expecting entertainment, Victoria interrupted smoothly. And I'm offering to provide it. Unless you have a better option? The coordinator didn't. No one did. Victoria made her way to the stage, her heels clicking against the floor with each confident step. She smiled at the audience, soaking in the attention like a flower soaking in sunlight. This was clearly a woman who loved being the center of attention. She sat down at the beautiful Steinway, positioned her fingers over the keys, and began to play. The first note was wrong. Maria winced from her hiding spot behind the plant. She could tell immediately that something was off. The sound was hesitant, uncertain. Victoria's fingers stumbled over the keys like a child, just learning to walk. The second note was worse. Victoria tried to recover, but the harder she tried, the worse it got. Wrong chords clanged through the ballroom, echoing off the high ceilings. The melody, if you could call it that, stumbled and lurched like a car with a flat tire. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some covered their mouths to hide their reactions. It was painful to watch. After 2 agonizing minutes, Victoria stopped abruptly. Her face was flushed red, though whether from embarrassment or anger, it was hard to tell. She stood up so quickly that the piano bench scraped loudly against the stage floor. "The piano is out of tune," she announced, her voice defensive. "It's impossible to play properly on an instrument that hasn't been maintained. Someone should really speak to whoever is responsible for this." She walked off the stage without another word, her head held high, refusing to acknowledge the disaster she had just created. The ballroom fell into an awkward silence. People didn't know where to look. The beautiful Steinway sat abandoned under the spotlight, silent and waiting, and Maria couldn't take her eyes off it. Her heart was pounding again, but this time it wasn't from fear or humiliation. It was something else entirely, something she hadn't felt in over a decade. The piano was calling to her. She thought about her grandmother's small apartment in Manila, where she had first learned to play. She thought about the conservatory, about the professors who had called her gifted, about the dreams she had been forced to abandon when life got too hard. She thought about all the years she had spent burying that part of herself, pretending it didn't exist anymore. And before she knew what she was doing, she was walking. Her feet carried her out from behind the potted plant, across the back of the ballroom, toward the stage. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know why she was doing it. All she knew was that the piano was waiting, and something inside her was tired of staying silent. She was halfway to the stage when she finally realized that people were starting to notice, and by then, it was too late to turn back. The whispers started almost immediately. Maria could hear them as she walked toward the stage, each step feeling heavier than the last. She could feel the eyes turning toward her, could sense the confusion rippling through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Wait, isn't that the cleaning woman? What is she doing? Is this some kind of joke? She wanted to stop. Every logical part of her brain was screaming at her to turn around, to go back to her hiding spot behind the potted plant, to pretend this moment of madness had never happened. What was she thinking? She was a janitor. She cleaned floors and emptied trash cans. She didn't belong on that stage, but her feet kept moving. It was like something had taken over her body, something older and deeper than fear. The piano was calling to her, and after 15 years of silence, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She reached the steps of the stage and climbed them slowly. The spotlight was warm on her face, almost blinding. She could barely see the audience beyond the first few rows, but she could feel them. Hundreds of people, all watching, all waiting to see what this strange woman in her simple black dress was going to do. Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Oh, this is just perfect." She was laughing, That same cruel laugh from earlier in the evening. First she ruins my dress, and now she thinks she can play the piano. This should be entertaining. Laughter rippled through part of the crowd. Not everyone was laughing, but enough people were. Maria felt her cheeks burn, but she didn't stop. She had come too far to stop now. She reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment, just looking at it. It really was beautiful. The black surface gleamed like a mirror, reflecting the lights from above. The keys were perfect, white and black, waiting silently for someone to bring them to life. She ran her fingers lightly along the edge of the instrument, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingertips. How long had it been since she had touched a piano? 15 years? 16? She had lost count somewhere along the way. After she left the conservatory, after she gave up her dreams, she had made a promise to herself. No more music. It hurt too much to play when playing reminded her of everything she had lost. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, she was tired of hiding. She sat down on the bench, adjusting her position the way she had done thousands of times before. The muscle memory was still there, buried deep inside her. Her back straightened. Her shoulders relaxed. Her hands lifted and hovered over the keys. The ballroom went quiet. Even Victoria had stopped laughing. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what would happen. Maria closed her eyes. She thought about her grandmother, who had first taught her to play on an old upright piano in their tiny apartment in Manila. She thought about the hours they had spent together, her grandmother's wrinkled hands guiding her small fingers across the keys. She thought about the way her grandmother used to smile when Maria played something beautiful, the way her eyes would fill with tears of joy. Music is a gift, her grandmother had always said. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, young or old. When you play from your heart, you can touch the soul of anyone who listens. Maria took a deep breath, and then she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade. No, one in G minor floated through the air. Soft and delicate, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Maria's fingers moved across the keys with a gentleness that surprised even her. It had been so long, but the music was still there, waiting inside her like a river that had been dammed for too many years. The whispers in the audience died immediately. The melody grew stronger, more confident. Maria let herself sink into the music, let it carry her away from the ballroom and the staring eyes and the cruel laughter. She was no longer a janitor in a borrowed dress. She was no longer the woman who had been humiliated on her knees just hours ago. She was exactly who she had always been, underneath all the years of struggle and sacrifice. She was a musician. The Chopin piece built in intensity. The notes cascading like waterfalls, crashing like waves against rocks. Maria's hands flew across the keyboard, finding chords she hadn't played in 15 years, as if she had practiced them just yesterday. The music swelled and filled the entire ballroom, reaching into every corner, touching every person who sat frozen in their seats, in the front row. An elderly woman pressed her hand to her chest, tears streaming down her face, near the back. A businessman who hadn't cried since his mother's funeral felt something break open inside him. Even Victoria Ashford had gone completely silent, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips, her eyes wide with something that looked almost like shock. Maria played on. She transitioned seamlessly from Chopin to Rachmaninoff, one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire. The Piano Concerto No. 2, with its thundering chords and soaring melodies, poured from her fingers like liquid fire. This was the piece that had won her the national competition back in the Philippines. The piece that had earned her a full scholarship to the conservatory. The piece that had once made critics call her a prodigy unlike any other. The audience sat motionless, barely breathing. Mr. Whitmore, the CEO who had helped Maria to her feet earlier that evening, leaned forward in his chair. His eyes were glistening, and a small smile had appeared on his weathered face. He had spent his entire life surrounded by the best that money could buy. The finest wines, the most expensive art, the most exclusive performances. But he had never heard anything quite like this. This wasn't just technical skill, though the technical skill was extraordinary. This was something more. This was a woman pouring her entire soul into the music, holding nothing back, letting years of pain and struggle and hope and dreams flow through her fingers and into the keys. Maria played for 15 minutes, though it felt like both an eternity and a single heartbeat. She played for her grandmother, who had died before seeing her granddaughter become the musician she always knew she could be. She played for herself, for the dreams she had been forced to abandon, for all the years she had spent in silence. She played for every person who had ever been looked down on, dismissed, told they weren't good enough, told they didn't belong. She played for everyone who had ever been invisible. When the final note faded away, hanging in the air like the last breath of a sunset, there was a moment of complete and total silence. Maria slowly opened her eyes. Her cheeks were wet with tears she didn't remember crying. Her hands were trembling slightly over the keys. She suddenly became aware of where she was, of what she had just done, and a wave of fear washed over her. What had she been thinking? She had just walked onto the stage at the biggest charity event of the year and played the piano like she belonged there. She was going to be fired. She was going to be thrown out. She was going to. The applause started with a single person. It was Mr. Whitmore. He rose to his feet, his hands coming together in a slow, steady clap that echoed through the silent ballroom. Then another person stood, and another, and another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. The applause was deafening, thunderous, a wave of sound that crashed over Maria and left her breathless. People were cheering. People were crying. People were shouting words she couldn't quite make out, but she could feel the emotion behind them. They were cheering for her. Maria Santos, the janitor, the cleaning woman, the invisible woman who was supposed to stay in the background where nobody would notice her. They were all cheering for her. And for the first time in 15 years, she let herself smile. The applause seemed to go on forever. Maria sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, unable to move. She felt like she was in a dream, the kind of dream you never want to wake up from. All around her, people were standing, clapping, some of them wiping tears from their eyes. These were the same people who had looked right through her all evening. The same people who had laughed when she fell to her knees. The same people who had treated her like she was nothing. Now they were on their feet for her. She didn't know how long the standing ovation lasted. It could have been 2 minutes or 10. Time had stopped making sense the moment she had touched those piano keys. All she knew was that when the applause finally began to fade, Mr. Whitmore was walking toward the stage. The elderly CEO moved slowly, but there was a new energy in his steps that hadn't been there before. His eyes were bright, and when he reached the stage, he didn't stop at the bottom of the stairs. He climbed them, one careful step at a time, until he was standing right beside Maria. The room went quiet again, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. Mr. Whitmore looked at Maria for a long moment, really looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he spoke, his voice soft but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Young lady, where on earth did you learn to play like that?" Maria swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, and she wasn't sure she could speak without crying. But she had spent too many years being silent. Tonight she had found her voice again. She wasn't going to lose it now. "The University of the Philippines Conservatory of Music," she said quietly. "I was a scholarship student. I studied there for 3 years." A murmur ran through the crowd. Mr. Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly. "A conservatory student," he repeated. And yet you work as a janitor in my building. How did that happen?" Maria took a deep breath. This was the part of the story she never told anyone. The part that still hurt after all these years. But something about this moment, something about the way Mr. Whitmore was looking at her with genuine curiosity and kindness, made her want to share it. "My grandmother raised me," she began. "She was the one who taught me to play. She saved every penny she had to buy me an old piano when I was 7 years old. It was missing 3 keys, and the sound was terrible, but I loved it more than anything in the world." The ballroom was completely silent now. Every person was leaning forward, listening. "When I was 18, I won a national competition. The prize was a full scholarship to the conservatory. It was the happiest day of my life. My grandmother cried for an hour when I told her." Maria smiled at the memory, even as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I studied there for 3 years. My professor said I had a gift. They said I could be one of the greats. I believed them. I believed that music was going to be my life." She paused, and her smile faded. "Then my grandmother got sick. Very sick. The kind of sick that requires expensive treatments and round-the-clock care. There was no money. There was no insurance. I was just a student with nothing but dreams and a piano. So I made a choice." Mr. Whitmore nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I left school," Maria continued. "I left everything. I came to America because I heard there were jobs here. Good jobs that could pay for my grandmother's treatment. I worked 3 jobs at once for 2 years straight. I sent every dollar home. Every single dollar." "And your grandmother?" Mr. Whitmore asked gently. Maria's voice broke slightly. "She passed away 4 years ago. But she died peacefully in a good hospital with the best care I could give her. That's all that mattered to me." The silence in the room was heavy with emotion. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman was openly crying. Even some of the men had tears in their eyes. "And the piano?" Mr. Whitmore asked. "Why did you stop playing?" Maria looked down at the beautiful Steinway beneath her fingers. "Because it hurt too much. Every time I touched the piano, I remembered everything I had given up. I remembered my dreams, my grandmother, the life I was supposed to have. So I stopped. I buried that part of myself and tried to forget it ever existed." She looked back up at Mr. Whitmore. "Until tonight." The old man was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. It was a warm smile, full of kindness and something that looked almost like wonder. "Do you know what I think?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think that for 3 years, I've had one of the most talented pianists in the world cleaning my floors, and I had no idea. I think that is one of the greatest tragedies I've ever heard. And I think it's time to fix it." Maria blinked. "Fix it? What do you mean?" Mr. Whitmore turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight was supposed to be about charity, about giving back to those less fortunate. Well, I can think of no better way to honor that spirit than to help this remarkable woman reclaim the life she sacrificed, someone she loved." He turned back to Maria. "I would like to personally fund a full scholarship for you to complete your music degree at any conservatory of your choosing. And I happen to know the director of this city's Philharmonic Orchestra quite well. I'm sure he would be very interested in hearing you play." Maria's mouth fell open. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This had to be a dream. This couldn't be real. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't know what to say. I can't possibly accept." "You can," he interrupted gently. "And you will. Consider it my thank you for saving this evening. That charity auction we were so worried about? I have a feeling it's going to do very well now." As if on cue, one of the guests stood up from his table. "I'll double my original pledge," he shouted. for the woman who just gave us the most beautiful performance I've ever heard." Another guest stood. "I'll triple mine." More voices joined in, each one pledging more than the last. The event coordinator, who had been watching from the side of the stage with tears streaming down her face, was frantically scribbling numbers on her clipboard. By the time the pledges stopped coming, the charity had raised more money than it had in the past 5 years combined. And through it all, Maria sat at the piano, overwhelmed, unable to fully process what was happening. Later that night, after the guests had finally gone home and the cleanup crew had started their work, Maria found herself alone on the stage one last time. She sat at the piano and played a simple melody, something her grandmother had taught her when she was just a little girl. The ballroom was empty now, but she wasn't playing for an audience. She was playing for herself, for her grandmother, for the girl she used to be and the woman she was becoming. 1 year later, Maria Santos graduated with honors from one of the most prestigious music programs in the country. 6 months after that, she performed her first solo concert with the City Philharmonic to a sold-out crowd. Mr. Whitmore was in the front row, smiling like a proud grandfather Dodd, and Victoria Ashford. She was there too, sitting somewhere in the back. She never apologized for what she had said that night at the gala. But as she watched Maria take her final bow to thunderous applause, something in her expression had changed. It wasn't kindness exactly, but it might have been the beginning of understanding. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for permission to be who they really are. They wait for the right moment, the right opportunity, the right person to give them a chance. But Maria Santos learned something important that night at the CEO's party. Sometimes you have to give yourself permission. Sometimes you have to walk onto the stage even when everyone expects you to stay in the shadows. Sometimes you have to sit down at the piano and play, even when the whole world thinks you don't belong there. Because the truth is, the people who underestimate you don't get to decide your worth. Only you get to decide that. And Maria Santos had finally made her choice.